Donald Deya, thank you very much for speaking with us on Bottom Line East Africa. Let's start by talking about this third term that is increasingly becoming popular in the region. Why are African presidents saying my first two terms were not enough?
I think it brings with it some sort of selfishness. This selfishness is usually born out of fear for many of them, things that they, their family and friends have done while they're in office, for which they don't want to be accountable. And then for some, it's just some sort of selfishness where they think that they are very special human beings, superhuman, almost like Jesus or Buddha, and that their countries can't do without them. Well, the converse is usually true. The law of diminishing returns applies. So even for a leader that started out good, the longer they spend in office, the worse their leadership becomes.
All right, how as Africans can we deal with the issue of African heads of state who are refusing to relinquish power? What can we do?
What we need is to develop, in my view, a stronger and more active citizenry. A citizenry willing to take their destiny into their own hands and courageous enough to face their errant leadership, whether in parliaments, in courts, in the media, or on the street, peacefully I might add. That is because we can have strong constitutions, but more than strong constitutions, we need to develop a strong constitutional culture, a culture of rule of law, a culture such that when our leaders cross the line, we the people are able to peacefully deal with them. That, I think, is what we need more than anything else on the continent.
All right, Donald, but you mentioned upholding the rule of law, which I suppose is one of the great tenets of a good democracy. In Rwanda, for example, it was 2 million Rwandese citizens that went to parliament and petitioned to allow President Kagame to run again. So some would say, perhaps in the case of Rwanda, it's the will of the people.
That could very well be the case. I think what exactly happened in Rwanda is something that we don't really know. How many of those signatures were genuinely gotten, and how many of them were literally extorted by force or by intimidation from the citizens? The other thing I can say about Rwanda is that I do know that one of the political parties there, the Democratic Green Party, has actually taken the matter to court. So the issue is before the Constitutional Court right now. And from what I understand, a group of other Rwandans are also bringing the same thing to the African Court on Human and People's Rights here in Arusha. So we haven't had the last of it. But even having said that, in a situation where it is the citizens that clearly say they want the thing, you can say that as a matter of right, you should give it to them. But I think we have a question here for Paul Kagame as well. If you have been such a good leader for 14 years, how come in 14 years you have not been able to institutionalize your leadership within your political party, within your political movement, so that, like Mwalimu Nyerere said, unaweza kung'atuka. You leave while your people still want you and hand over the baton to somebody else to continue the good work. You don't wait for the Lord to be the one to take care of it, as happened to Meles Zenawi in Ethiopia.
All right, is it African leaders who stay in power, or is it the electorate that keeps them there? I think we've seen efforts by the citizens in Burundi to try and rise up, even in the DRC with Joseph Kabila earlier this year in January. So it almost seems sometimes, Donald, that the electorate seems helpless, or sometimes perhaps don't want to do anything about it, or are happy with presidents running for a third term. Which is it?
I mean, if you set aside for a moment, and I grant him that, if you set aside for a moment what is happening in Rwanda, if you look at each and every of the other countries where constitutions were amended to remove term limits, if those leaders were so popular, why then did they have to muzzle all dissent within the country in order for the third term project to work? If you look at them in each of those cases, even within their own leader's political party, there were people who were telling him, no, this is not what we agreed upon. Give us a chance to run democratically for the party leadership with you, and they had to be fixed. Look at Yoweri Museveni with those who opposed candidature within the party. Kiza Besigye before, Winnie Byanyima, Eria Kategaya, this year Amama Mbabazi, it is hardly reassuring to us that even within the party that they agreed with him to be the sole candidate. He had to use force and money. So I don't buy the argument that it is the electorate that wants it. In many instances, what really puts the citizens down is that the leaders are willing to misuse force. We have seen, for instance, Yoweri Museveni misusing force against the people of Uganda. Even people doing the Black Monday protests, just a protest not against Museveni but against corruption. You bring out the police, you beat them black and blue, you spray them with peppered water or colored water. So literally it's like you're saying that the only way we can remove you is by the gun. But we want to be peaceful people. That's a dilemma that many African citizens face.
All right, let's focus on the political crisis in Burundi for a moment now. And this question about Africa being the one that solves its own problems and not looking to the West. But Donald, do you think regional leaders and organizations are doing enough? It's the AU, for example. It sometimes seems like a slap on the wrist saying we do not condone the elections. In fact, the AU said, you know, postpone the elections by a week or two. And now he is back in office. I believe even the AU itself did not send, you know, election observers for the Burundi election. What more can regional leaders do towards solving political crisis in the country, and this specific one in Burundi?
Sometimes really the problem is with elected political leaders, especially at the level of the presidency. Let's look at Burundi for a moment. The East African Community Summit, the heads of state, chose to let down the people of Burundi and the people of East Africa. They sought a legal opinion from their own attorneys general. And the attorneys general of the region wrote a very clear legal opinion to the heads of state saying that Nkurunziza's candidature is illegal both under the Burundi Constitution of 2005 and the Arusha Agreement, also called the Arusha Accords of 2000. So it is our heads of state who failed to make a statement to that request. Look again to that opinion. So right now, the East African Legislative Assembly led an election observation mission to Burundi, and they have clearly criticized the results. The report is out. It has been signed actually by a Kenyan member of the East African Legislative Assembly, Zain Abubakar. So we're waiting to see what the leaders will do. The report is there, they should act on it. Now come to the AU. In the case of Burundi, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, the chairperson of the AU Commission, that is the AU Secretariat, has been very clear and categorical. She has said that it is illegal, she has said that this Nkurunziza should not stand, and so on. The only problem is Dr. Nkosazana, as chairperson of the Secretariat, has no army of her own. She has no capacity to levy sanctions on her own. So for this, she'll have to go back to the gathering of heads of states, who are the ones that lack the guts to act. So in some instances, the rules and the mechanisms exist, and the leaders just refuse to use them. And it's about we, the citizens, seeing how we can actually force them to obey the law that already exists.
All right, Donald, I'd like your comment on the choice of President Museveni as the one to broker the deal with the political crisis in Burundi.
Yoweri Museveni had no moral authority to go and preach democracy or mediation to a neighboring country. And our leaders were actually, in my view, completely irresponsible of all the East Africans they could choose to choose Yoweri Museveni to be the one to go and negotiate peace. As at the time he was flying to Burundi, he has left his own competitor within his own party, Amama Mbabazi, in jail for daring to say, I seek the party candidature. He has left his competitor within the alternative political parties, Kizza Besigye, in jail. So what moral authority does he have to go and preach democracy to anybody else? It was completely irresponsible for President Kenyatta, President Kikwete, President Kagame to choose such a person to be the one to mediate. There are enough East Africans, whether they've served as head of state or not, who could have done a better job.
All right, so where does this leave us, Donald? We have the situation in Burundi. Rwanda's election is coming up, so is the DRC, and a number of other countries within the region when we're talking about what you're calling lifetime presidencies rather than third terms. So what happens now? You talked about the AU not having a force to go in and sort of compel some of the leaders to step down. What's next?
I think as African citizens, because at the end of the day it is going to be us, we've got to see how we roll up our sleeves and actually tackle this thing head on as citizens. For one, we need stronger regional institutions. We need stronger continental institutions, that's for certain. And we need institutions whereby we give more power to those who are elected or appointed to serve full term in those institutions. Not just heads of state who come about once or twice a year, or ministers of foreign affairs or of East African community affairs. But when we look at the East African community, for instance, what strength does the Secretary General of the community, Ambassador Richard Sezibera, have to act on his own? What tools does he have? As the Pan-African Lawyers Union, we're having our annual conference in Abuja later on in September, from 17th to 21st. And we're dedicating a whole session just to discuss this problem of life presidencies in Africa and what we as lawyers can do, using courts, using parliaments, both at the regional level and also at the national level, and then just using the streets peacefully, the way the people of Burkina Faso did. They just went and said, we are not going to have you again. If you're going to bribe parliament to make sure that parliament gives you a third term, we will make sure that that parliament does not do it. I mean, and this is a call out to our leaders. Don't wait until the bullets begin flying. In Burundi now, yesterday, one of the leading supporters and backers of Pierre Nkurunziza, General Chimirimana, was shot dead by I don't know who. We are condemning that shooting, but we are also telling African leaders, don't wait until you have to be dragged out kicking or screaming or by the gun, as happened to Hosni Mubarak, happened to Muammar Gaddafi, happened to the guy in Tunisia and so on. Because if citizens lose all peaceful ways, they will take less peaceful ways, and you'll have only yourself to blame.
All right, thank you very much for your time. Donald Deya, the Chief Executive of the Pan-African Lawyers Union, speaking to us from Arusha, Tanzania.